Hi, welcome to another Fix Your Gut, the live stream. My name's Jason Hooper, and we're here with John Brisson.
Hope everybody's doing well.
So the Unfair Advantage giveaway is back. We've got Unfair Advantage that we're giving away to all of our YouTube subscribers. Well, not all of our YouTube subscribers. We choose one per week at random, and we give it away. So thanks to Upgraded Self for supporting us and letting us give away some Unfair Advantage. It's a good supplement. I like it. Hope you win. You get to try it. It's really good. How you doing this week, John?
Doing well, Jason. How are you doing?
Not too bad. We're going to do a show about vaccinations. It's a hot topic right now, and something kind of interesting happened in John's family that caused a lot of discussion about vaccines and how they work, and a bunch of things that they might not tell you at the doctor's office. There's a lot of controversy surrounding vaccines because there are some very extreme and inaccurate viewpoints on both sides of the vaccine debate, and we hope to bring some rational discussion to the table, so that I guess we're just interested in knowledge and not necessarily in dogma. So
yeah, I agree. Probably gonna get flamed for our middle of road approach on this because people are so passionate about vaccinations.
Yeah, I mean, if you're one extreme or the other, depending on which side of the fence you're on for this argument, if you're an extreme and you think an extremist and you think that everyone should be vaccinated no matter what, or and they should be mandatory, you're probably gonna get mad at us after this. And also, if you think that vaccinations are the devil and it's going to kill us all, then you're also probably going to get mad at us. So sorry, that's just the way it's going to be. So first thing I want to do is talk about vaccines, the different types of vaccines and how they work. So there's a lot of different types of vaccines out there. Vaccines have actually been around for over 1,000 years, believe it or not. John, you know the first country to start using vaccinations?
Offhand, no. Hopefully you do. I mean,
I don't know. I was just wondering. No, just kidding.
No, I'm talking about smallpox and so forth. And
yeah, smallpox actually was the first vaccine. It was an attenuated vaccine that they would get from the open source of survivor for people who had survived smallpox, and
they're giving them cowpox.
Yeah, well, it was actually live smallpox vaccine that they were giving people, and the rationale was, well, if it didn't kill them, it must not be as virulent as the smallpox that killed these other people. So they would get it from people who looked like they were going to recover from the smallpox, and they'd extract stuff from their legions, and they'd give them to other people, and so that's they've been doing similar things to that for over 1,000 years. So vaccines are not new, but the way that they cultivate and administer the vaccines are new. Because
I didn't think we were going to talk about Edward Jenner today and the creation of vaccines, because everyone starts from there.
Okay, well, I mean, I don't know. I just thought
Jonas Salk.
I thought it was an interesting factoid that we've been using vaccines for that long. Anyway, so that's an example of an attenuated vaccine. An attenuated vaccine is when you take a vaccine and you try to reduce its virulence, and there are many different ways to do this. It just depends on who made the vaccine and the method that they chose to do. Sometimes they weaken the vaccine, or sometimes they weaken. An attenuated vaccine uses a live virus. Sometimes they culture the virus in cells in the media that's foreign to the original host. So if they get let's say they're trying to inoculate somebody for the X virus. They would find somebody with the X virus, and they would extract the virus from that person, and they would put it into a cell with different genetic makeup, like a chicken egg or something, and they would hope that through that process, the virus would not replicate as easily, and it would not be as virulent when they use it in another vaccine.
It would be in a weakened state.
Yeah, in a weakened state. There's other ways to weaken the virus too. They can do it through like a plasmoid construct, and they could make it genetically inferior. But a lot of them, they use a mutated form of the virus that's less viral but still contains the antigen causing agent so that your body builds up immunity. Another type of vaccine that they have is called an inactivated vaccine. This is where they just kill the virus or bacteria, and
your body reacts to it.
Yeah, so it still contains some of the antigen components that that the live vaccine would have, but you might have some symptoms from an inactivated vaccine, but it's very, very rare that you would end up catching the actual virus or bacteria from an inactivated vaccine, unless the inactivation didn't work. But the chances of that are very, very, very slim. There are toxoid vaccines. Toxoid vaccines are when they take the toxic compound that the bacteria or virus makes, and they just they give that to a person. That way, when they're infected with something and it starts to make those toxic compounds, the body's a little wiser. They're conjugate vaccines.
Vaccination, Bordetella Pertussis toxins. They used to be attenuated, but it's not anymore.
Yeah. So they have some new vaccines that are in testing right now, some DNA vaccines and some recombinant vector vaccines, which are pretty cutting edge. So those are the different types of vaccines. Do they work? We can, some people say vaccines don't work, but there's a lot of data out there suggesting that it does. You can give somebody a vaccine, and you can look at their IgG markers afterwards, and or years later, and you can see if they have those antibodies made, or the cytokine lymphocytes that are made to protect from that pathogenic agent. And if they do, then they're very unlikely to get a full-on infection from that vaccine, from the illness when exposed. Correct. So there are testing parameters. There are ways to.
We know about people who've gotten the rabies vaccination who have survived and never contracted rabies.
Yeah,
as case reports, I guess, which are the weakest science, but still there.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's been a couple of cases of people who have survived rabies, one in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Extremely rare, extremely rare.
Yeah, if you have a chance of being infected by rabies, you should probably get the shot. It's very, very difficult to survive. I wouldn't risk that.
So we do know that vaccinations do work with a degree of success.
Yeah.
The pro-vaccinations will say that it works a lot more often than the numbers tell. The anti-vaxxers, for some reason or another, say they do not work at all. I'm inclined to agree with Hooper that some work better than others. For example, the flu shot would almost be like throwing a dart at a dartboard blindfolded and hoping that you get it correct.
There's actually an app that you can download. It's like a game. And what you do is you pick different protein combinations in this vaccine that you're designing to ward people off from the flu, and you can look at genetic trends, and you can look at antigen agents and try to predict what's going to happen, and you design this vaccine and you give it to your population, and you can see how effective it's going to be. It's a very difficult game to win, and there's a lot of luck involved. And this is a game where you can like hit the reset button and play as many times as you want before you finally get something that looks like it's effective. But the flu vaccine, the reason why that's not effective is because
the flu mutates rapidly, for one.
It mutates, and predicting what's going to happen is very difficult because there's too many protein combinations to develop the same proteins which would form an antigen that we would develop some kind of immunization to. But the flu shots are on the recommended vaccination schedule for everybody to get. You know, you're supposed to get, even infants, they're supposed to get a vaccine for every single year, and it's pretty much worthless. I mean, there's no way. I mean, it's not effective at all.
Yes, and a lot of the science shows that the flu shot is one of the vaccinations that are ineffective. The crazy thing is most anti-vaxxers do not talk about the flu shot. You know, granted, you know, the flu shot, the risk that you have, of course, you know, among other risks, is Guillain-Barré syndrome. We could talk all day of whether or not that's tied in with the influenza virus, because you can get it in the normal population. And live attenuated nasal vaccinations for the flu scare me. I knew a little girl who was brought in when Abel was up at the hospital about a year and a half, 2 years ago in Chapel Hill, who had a live nasal attenuated flu vaccination. And a few days later, she was feeling very ill. They had to put her in intensive care. They were pumping large amounts of fluid and mucus out of her lungs. Yet the doctors would not blame the live attenuated flu vaccination that she'd recently got. Instead, it could be anything else other than that was causing this respiratory illness. She did later recover from it, though, which is a blessing. But if you did have to get the flu shot, I would definitely not get the nasal attenuated one. It's a lot safer for you to get it, more than likely, in the arm, which would be, of course, a dead vaccination.
Yeah, the attenuated vaccines carry more risk. They're more effective.
Yes, they're more effective. You get long-term resistance to these vaccinations. And that's why a lot of anti-vaxxers will bring up, well, if we give someone the varicella a vaccination, they develop shingles later in life if their immune system ever goes down. Well, of course so. You just gave them varicella, and you know, varicella doesn't go away. It lives in the trigeminal nerve for the rest of your life once you come in contact with it. You gave them a live version of it. So, you know, that's only common sense. You know, that's not a negative, you know, that's just, you know, scientific logic. You know, so it would be the same as if, you know, Jason had chickenpox and his immune system went down and he developed shingles. Sadly, what Jason was talking about earlier, my daughter developed chickenpox after my son had gotten his vaccination, his final one for school, which is extraordinarily rare, but can't happen because it is a live attenuated virus.
When I was doing research for the show, I did a Google search for vaccination myths, and something came, like most of them, I went through a lot of them. Most of them are clickbait, but I was just curious to see what people thought. And most of them say that it is a myth that you can get infected from a vaccination. And
that is not a myth. If it's attenuated, that is not a myth.
Yeah, you can possibly even get it from other types of vaccines too. But what can happen?
It's extraordinarily rare.
Yeah, the attenuated vaccine is a less viralized form of the virus, but it still can be viral, and you can also have what's called a double mutation, where it reverts back to its viralized form, and this happens all the time. You know, if greater protection, but it also comes with greater risk.
That's why people have compromised immune systems to try to avoid attenuated vaccinations. Even the pro-vaccination group admits that.
Yeah, if we go back to 1963, so we're going to get some more history here. For you who hate history, just skip ahead a couple minutes. But 1963, there were 2 measles vaccines that were introduced onto the market. The first, the Edmonton B vaccine, which was an attenuated virus. It was taken out of a kid's kidneys. The kid's name was David. Edmonds named it after him. If you ever have something named after you, folks, that's
not a good thing.
I'm sorry. No, it's definitely not. But then the other one was the FIMV vaccine, which was inactivated. And in North America, during this time period, from 1963 until probably about 1982, the preferred treatment was the FIMV vaccine, the inactivated vaccine, because it had fewer side effects than the attenuated vaccine. Well, guess what? If you do an IgG test on anybody who is vaccinated with the FIMV vaccine, they are not carrying the antibodies for measles vaccine that they were given. So they're completely vulnerable to it. So that's the more risk, there's a higher risk reward ratio with the attenuated vaccine than there is with the inactivated vaccines. But that's the data that's out there. And so for people that are going around saying that everybody should be vaccinated, it should be mandatory, everybody, you're causing public harm and you're putting everybody at risk. There's an entire generation of people, like most of the baby boomers out there, are not vaccinated for measles unless they've been revaccinated. And also, vaccines can wear off over time. We don't really know why, but sometimes these vaccines wear off.
But natural immunity wears off over time too, so who are we to suspect that vaccination acquired immunity would be any different?
So natural immunity is when you full on catch the disease in the wild. And you catch the disease and you get sick, and then you get the immunity to the disease. A lot of the times, virally, natural immunity can come from you still having the virus being incurable, and your body can't reject it, like hepatitis or some of the herpes simplex viruses. So if you get those, it's a pretty darn good natural immunization, because you still have it in your body. With some of the herpes viruses, though, like you can get them in different places. They can spread around, which can also be bad. So that's not a good thing. But that's yet another example.
Well, I mean, we're not saying this show isn't about us being either pro or con. And I'll be honest with you, I had 2 of my children vaccinated. I had Amelia vaccinated, my daughter, and Holden, my son. But Abel didn't get any vaccinations. It was we did talk with his geneticist, who said because of his rare condition, that vaccination would put him at a risk that we felt was greater than if he caught any of the diseases in the first place. Now, this is subjective, but Abel had, even though he was hospitalized because of his condition, had fewer illnesses than my vaccinated son, who relatively had very few too. But it is interesting. Now, whether or not that's the same for every child, no, and I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but I did find that to be interesting. So it's a personal choice that every parent, I believe, has the right to make. I don't think the government should force us to get any vaccinations, but I guess that would be more aligned with my libertarian beliefs. So it does irritate me how the state of North Carolina, for example, requires almost every vaccination except for the flu and Gardasil. And there's also, we can get in, Jason and I can get into it later, of how I do think it's harmful that we give so many vaccinations at one time. And there are certain vaccinations for children, like hepatitis B, for example, where they could get it later in life and don't necessarily have to have it at birth as long as the mother did not have it. It's facetious to think that, vaccinations are both totally harmful and completely harmless.
Yeah, there's if you're a parent, and it's ultimately up to the parents to make these decisions for the children, and not all parents are this, not everybody's in the same situation. And so I have a vaccination protocol that I use, and I posted it so people can see it. But my son is in a different situation than a lot of other people's kids. My son's not in daycare, and so he's not at risk to certain illnesses that you might have in daycare. And so we can wait a little bit longer to vaccinate on some things, and we can we can pick and choose. But yeah, I mean, I did give my son some vaccines too, but the way that I chose how to vaccinate or not vaccinate, I went through some statistics that I found, and I just wanted to know, based on my child's situation, were the risks worth the reward? And there was a 1992 study published in the American Journal of Epidemiology that shows that the DTP vaccination, that children are 8 times more likely to get DTP from the vaccine than they are in the wild. So why would you vaccinate for that?
And they're also carrying it around as reservoirs. And then they also switched the toxin vaccination, which we can discuss that later, that you're actively injecting, endotoxins into the bloodstream.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you're doing it through the muscle, and eventually it will, circulate through the whole body, but it's the same idea.
Yeah. The HIV vaccine, you're 5 times more likely to get that, or children are 5 times more likely to get that from the inoculation versus catching that bacteria in the wild. So there's another one that's controversial, and it turns out that 80% of children who were diagnosed with whooping cough were fully vaccinated for it. So they don't.
I mean, there's walk around being active reservoirs of the bacterium, obviously. For at least not forever, but at least for a period of time.
Yeah. Jonas Salek, the inventor of the polio vaccine, testified in 1977 with a bunch of other scientists, and he was talking about the polio vaccine. And he said from 1970 to 1977 that most of the polio cases in the United States were coming from the vaccine and not from the wild. And that's even more true today. 87% of people during that time period from 70 to 77 were getting the vaccine getting the polio from the vaccine and not through contagion, not in the wild. So there are definitely some risks that a lot of people don't want to tell you about.
And that's the main problem, is that doctors in the medical, complex don't want to be open with these issues. That's my main problem. If all this was laid out, because I watched a 2-hour documentary, an anti-vaccination documentary, and it pulled on the heartstrings, don't get me wrong. And a lot of the stuff sickens me. But that's one of the main things, where all these parents were told by these doctors that these vaccinations were 100% safe, and none of the side effects the children had came from the vaccinations at all. It's that type of medical propaganda that sickens me, because we should be honest on both sides about the debate.
Yeah, I mean, doctors and I don't get along very often.
Me either. They hate me.
Yeah, I mean, they just don't want to be told what to do. And I have my vaccination schedule for my son right here, and I showed him what I wanted. I explained everything to him, and he just got angry with me. He was just, I've never seen somebody so irrationally angry. And he's like,
God, my doctor was fine with it, I guess because they're able, so.
Yeah, he's like, why don't you want to do this? I just don't understand. You have to. These are serious diseases. You have to do this. And I guess there's a fear that if everybody stops immunizing, then there's no more herd immunity.
But that's not necessarily true either. I mean, one good thing the anti-vaxxers say is that the rates of diseases were going down before a lot of these vaccinations were ever introduced into the general population. And that is true. A lot of that has to do with the good of modern medicine, which is hygiene, and antibiotics and medicines and so forth and so on. And that did drive a lot of these infections down before the vaccinations were even used in general public. It's hard. One of the main thing that irritates me, which I guess is a little bit of a side tangent, but it'll be for a minute, about the so-called paleo and natural health movement, is that we love to say that conventional medicine gets wrongs on a lot of things, and especially hygiene. That our environments are too clean and sterile, which in some ways they are, but there's a lot of good things that came from hygiene and sterilization. Ancient man, a lot of the time died from disease. I don't see why people can't understand that.
Yeah, it's true. Hygiene, there's a risk reward with hygiene also.
Correct, there is.
If you go if you go back and listen to the interview with Dr. Larry Weiss from AO Biome, the makers of AO Plus, he'll talk to you about some of the bad things about hygiene as well, and what that's brought about. But just having good hygiene, and that blanket statement that they made was, they're basically trying to say vaccinations are unnecessary by saying that, hygiene's going to take care of all this stuff.
And it doesn't. I agree.
Hygiene's not going to protect you from hepatitis.
Correct.
Hepatitis B. It's not going to do that. It's not going to.
But I am saying that hygiene did have a lot to do with our modern health advancement and to ward off disease. You can't tell me that that's not true. I mean, even if you say that hygiene in the house is not, but at least the hygiene that we have in the medical establishment as far as clean utensils and so forth and so on. And people do still get sick in the hospital, get infections in the hospital, don't get me wrong. But it's still a better chance for you to go in a hospital now than it was in 1850.
Yeah, I read something like it wasn't until like 1906 before before surgeons started washing their hands.
Correct, yeah.
That's kind of wild, but hey, again, it's a risk reward thing. If the hygiene hypothesis, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the hygiene hypothesis says that the rise in allergies, people
is because we're too hygienic.
Yeah, and also autoimmune stuff. And then Larry Weiss in the interview went beyond that and said that not only is it the hygiene that causes that, but it's the byproducts, the hexanes in the benzenes that are in the commercial soaps
Cleaners
and stuff that we use. Yeah, and the house.
I would rise to say that I would agree with more Dr. David Perlmeyer's work, that it's just because a lot of infants are being born through C-sections nowadays in hospitals, as well as they're giving antibiotics as children, and they're also giving formula. The gut microbiome's not able to develop properly, and of course we can bring up vaccinations too as well. As being straining on the immune system when you're getting 5 or 6 of them at a time. And even I can't dispute that. That's why I had my own vaccination schedule for both my children as well. I wasn't going to give them, even when I first started out with Holden, which was been about 5, almost 6 years ago, even then with the limited knowledge I had, I wasn't going to give him 1 million vaccinations at one time. Come on now.
Well, another thing with the babies and infants especially, their immune systems are still developing.
Correct.
And the immune system, most of the human immune system is coming from where?
Whatever it comes in contact to, generally.
Well, and the microbiome of
Correct.
the
Yeah.
gut
Correct.
is forming that. So there are some oligosaccharides in breast milk and some fermental. There's some stuff that's in breast milk to make sure that the babies can develop their gut biome. But while that's developing, they're exposed.
Correct. I mean, that's why C-sections give you a greater risk, because instead of getting the vaginal flora, and even when, moms defecate on their children, to give them some of that flora too, as nasty as that is. Infants that have been delivered by cesarean section have bacteria that we would normally find on our hands, staph, and all that's growing in their gut. It's not good.
Yeah. And the other thing I think is that like there's like, as soon as the baby's born, they like wash it and clean it off and everything. And we're doing a natural birth with our next son, Patrick, who's going to be born any day now. My wife's 39 weeks tomorrow.
Congratulations. I'm pretty sure she wants whatever happened to get the baby out of her.
Yeah. Right now she's not enjoying
the miracle of childbirth, Jason. Thank God we were born then and don't have to go through it.
Yeah, but the midwife is going to allow us to to not wash the baby for a while, so that starts to get a jump start on forming the microbiome and getting a jump start on immunology as well. The natural immune system in the gut. But when people, when their gut's not healthy, and a lot of people are, like, well, my gut seems fine, and that's all good and everything. I'm not interested in gut health. I don't need to fix your gut, whatever. That's fine. But when somebody does have gut problems, particularly problems with forming mucus in the intestines, and you have what's called leaky gut.
Yeah.
It really disrupts the immune system. And you look at the effects of LPS, which is an endotoxin.
Polysaccharides, yeah.
Yeah, and they just wreak havoc in the body.
And that might be why some of the side effects of the new DTaP vaccination, a lot of issues have been correlated with that, is because you're injecting that into a person directly.
Yeah, absolutely. Instead of something that's
attenuated or dead.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yep. But getting back to that, that's why we have to continue to inoculate children over and over and over again. I mean, they get these booster shots. It's not a different vaccine. It's the same exact
one. No, it's the same exact one. Yeah.
It's not a booster. It's not like, oh, well, this just reminds the first one to work. No, it's the same. It's the same thing. They just have to do it so much because vaccines don't always take. But what they could do is they could go in and do an IgG test and see if the antibodies are there, and if they are,
antibody tiers.
They don't need to give them another one.
But doctors don't want to do that. They don't want to see if your shot has antibody tiers to varicella on that naturally, or MMR or anything like that. They just want to get as many shots as they can into you, because that's what the AMA says to do, and the CDC.
Yeah. Yeah, that's and so a lot of the time, as a parent, I chose, since my kid's not in daycare, he's not going to be exposed to measles, mumps, or rubella, because where's he going to get it from? So we're going to delay that one so that he doesn't have to get it multiple times, because they're not going to test for the antibodies. So we're just going to wait until before he goes to school.
Because most school systems will allow you, as long as you test positive for those antibodies, they'll waive the requirement for the vaccination. It does depend on state by state, but North Carolina, for example, if you can prove that you have MMR antibodies, you don't have to get the shot.
Yeah, but the thing is with MMR, and I'm going to inoculate eventually, because for especially in males,
sterility.
Yeah, you can sterilize you, and some of these diseases can leave you with lifelong problems. Some of these diseases can be lethal.
But the anti-vaxxers would say with MMR, sterility or autism, which one?
Well, there's absolutely no link to vaccines and autism.
Correct. There isn't.
There's
Sadly,
none.
I'm sorry, there's not. Now, does that mean that vaccinations, I believe honestly autism is dysbiosis in the gut at an early age. It could be something else, but that's my opinion. Could vaccinations overload the immune system and possibly harm, the gut and so forth and so on? Yes, they could. I'll be honest with you. But there's no direct link as of yet.
Yeah, I don't think there is going to be one.
I don't think there will be.
I think it's coincidental that the kids are showing symptoms around the same time where they get their 2-year or their 2-year shots, or their that's just what happens, and it's unfortunate, but I don't think that there's any link there.
I mean, is it a possibility they just have a bad gut to begin with and they get the vaccination and that's just one thing over the edge?
I work in the school system, so and there's been a rise in autism for sure. There's been a definite rise in autism, so there's got to be something causing it.
I don't think it's diagnostic methods improvement. I will say that. For anybody out there, I don't think just because they've improved the diagnosis methods, that's the reason the rise of autism.
I'm not really sure what's causing it. There's a lot.
I'm not either. I just think it's a whole bunch of different things,
like.
But I do believe it starts in the gut, though.
Yeah, it's almost back to school. So right now I'm going to a lot of in-service meetings and hearing a lot of speakers talk about stuff like that, and they talk about autism a lot, and they always have a hypothesis of why it's happening.
Yeah,
it just kind of depends on who you talk to. I mean, if you talk to us, we're going to say it's your gut because, it's fix your gut. If you talk to Jack Cruz, he's going to say it's EMFs. If you talk to your dentist, he'll say it's your teeth. It's everybody, they have a reason for thinking it's a certain way. And it might all be the same thing. I mean, because EMFs affect your gut, your teeth is part of the same system of, your mouth is part of your digestive tract too. So, hey, it could be whatever, but I'm pretty darn sure it's not vaccinations. So it's just stop saying that it is, because the problem with the anti-vaccine people is they talk so much nonsense that they lose credibility for
instantly.
For a parent like me, who if I want to delay a vaccine, or I want to omit some vaccines, they make me look like I'm crazy. And so then the pro-vaccine people are like, this is why society is going to fall apart and everything. It's because of people like you, and you're irresponsible and all this stuff. So, whatever. But I do give my son vaccines regularly for things, because, like, let's say I'm at work and somebody's violin is having problems, and they say, hey, Mr. Hooper, can you help me with my violin? Take the violin, I tune the violin up or whatever's wrong with it, and then somebody sneezed on him or whatever, and then now it's on the violin, now it's on me, and I come home and my son wants a hug, and I give my son a hug, and he puts his head down on my shoulder. He gets sick with it, even though I'm not infected. It's a possible outcome. So there's some things that are, that I weighed that in as a risk as well. And since I'm in a college town, I'm surrounded by a lot of international people that are coming in and out of the country. Oh
Lord, don't flame us for that, but you are right, and most are unvaccinated.
Yeah. So, well, not necessarily unvaccinated, but like they're not. Most of them are vaccinated because they have to be vaccinated to get their visa. And
no, I was talking about illegal.
No. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the international students and professors that are here at Texas A&M. But yeah, I mean, even illegal immigrants in Texas can go to any clinic and get vaccinated.
That's true.
No problem at all. Nobody. I mean, look, it's not an issue. They can come in. And it's not illegal immigration, but that's a topic for another time. But anyway, in other countries, they have their disease rates can be higher or lower in certain areas,
and there can be different strains too as well that you're not, naturally somewhat halfway immune to, as well.
Yeah. So we want to look at the risk. The other thing that people always say is, oh, there's toxins in vaccines.
Well, of course there are. I mean, but I mean, there are reason why they're there. You know, like Thermosil, for example. I'm against it, obviously, but there is a reason why Thermosil is in a vaccination, because it helps prevent overgrowth. Or you know, so I mean, there's a reason why Thermosil is in there. Now, could they use better ingredients? Of course. Just like vaccinations will have neomycin in there, which is used to weaken bacterial infections. Now, do I agree with the use of neomycin to be injected into someone? No, I do not, because it has risks. Neomycin is a relatively somewhat safe antibiotic if applied to the skin, or even possibly taken orally, as long as you do not have a leaky gut. Once injected or taken by IV, even though it's minute doses when injected in a vaccination, but it still has significant risks, of course, with ototoxicity of the ears, and that's the reason why we don't use neomycin as a systemic antibiotic anymore. You know, so the reason why a lot of these, what we call adjuncts, you know, evil adjuncts, some would say, are in the vaccinations. Now, should there be such things as clean vaccinations available to people without most of these adjuncts, or safer ones that people could take that would still keep these vaccinations from becoming bad or expiring? You know, preservatives, should we say? There should be. You know, it's a risk that someone has to take when they get a vaccination. I would assume that Jason would agree with me on that.
I agree mostly, but the other thing is there is, with all of these ingredients that could be seen as having toxic component, which are aluminum, formaldehyde, neomycin, Thermosil, yeah, they are in very low quantities.
Correct.
And you know, there was some blogger who came out with this thing about aluminum in your vaccines. It's terrible. It's terrible. If you look at how little aluminum is compared to the amount, and it's less than what is in the breast milk that the infants are feeding on.
But is there a difference between getting it in the breast milk and having aluminum go through the digestion system than it is having it injected into you? It's not great that you're mainlining the aluminum. It's not coming into you through an IV bag, but you're still getting it injected into you, though.
With aluminum, as long as...
Because aluminum through the digestive system is barely poorly absorbed.
Well, it is absorbed, though, and it...
I know, but it's poorly absorbed through the digestive system. It's still absorbed, but it's poorly absorbed.
Well, I'll tell you what, you know, my grandfather's a welder. Well, he wasn't a welder by trade, but like Jason Miller. So Jason, if you're watching and I butcher this, I'm sorry, but he was a farmer and he welded a lot of stuff on the farm. And when you're working with aluminum, it's very tricky. You have to have like a zero oxygen environment, because aluminum will just stick to everything when there's oxygen present. So when oxygen is in your system, when oxygen's in your system, it will be escorted. It will bind to the oxygen and be, you know, escorted out that way. They say they find aluminum in the brains of people who have Alzheimer's.
Well, of course, because they have an blood-brain barrier.
Yeah, and well, not just that, but they fundamentally don't understand Alzheimer's then if they're making that correlation. And they're saying, like, well, don't use aluminum in your antiperspirant because that's what's causing Alzheimer's. They just don't have an understanding of that disease then, if that's the correlation they're making, because the reason why the aluminum is showing up in the brains there of the Alzheimer's patients is because of hypoxia. Yeah. There's a lack of oxygen in the brain, so the brain is starving from oxygen, and that's where the aluminum is, because that's where the train ended for that ride for the aluminum. No more oxygen, and it's there, just like the welding situation. Any welder will probably tell you the same thing. So you get an intravenous injection of aluminum, same thing's going to happen. So, I mean, is it great for you? No, it's not. But, I mean, are you going to get the same amount of aluminum that you would from drinking out of an aluminum can actually into your system? Yeah, it's probably going to be about the same amount. So I don't think it's any, it's
Me and
not.
you disagree. I think it'd be a little bit less from ingesting it, but I mean, unless you have leaky gut, then it would increase, obviously. But that's just studies that they've done on aluminum and acid preparations. Now, me and you would both agree that your antiperspirant, aluminum antiperspirant, even though I wouldn't suggest using it, very little aluminum is going to be absorbed through the skin.
Yeah, I'm not exactly up on my science on how much is going to be absorbed through the skin. I'm more worried about other things in the commercial grade antiperspirants, and the whole thing of blocking our ability to sweat. We're supposed to sweat. That's part of the detoxification process, and so I'm into more of deodorants and stuff. But we're kind of getting off track here. For me, I just don't think that. I think that it's definitely part of the risks with the toxins and vaccines, but there's very, very small amounts of all the aforementioned toxins.
What about the vaccinations being cultivated from DNA, like from eggs, for example, or human diploid cells? What about that? Because I mean, generally, when it comes to breaking down of DNA, most of the time it's through the digestive system, through proteins and amino acids and so forth and so on, not necessarily being injected directly into us. How do you feel about that?
Well, okay, so are you talking about like genetic jumping or?
Yeah, that could be one thing. I mean, we know out of the polio vaccinations cultivated from aborted fetuses. I believe in the 1960s, there was one aborted fetus, and they got it from human lung tissue, and that's where they still produce the polio virus today.
What?
From that line? Yeah, they do. I'm dead serious.
I'm gonna fact check you on that. Hold on.
Fact check me on it. Now they claim that there's no tissue left. That it's been produced for so long that there's no tissue left. But yes, that is correct. Human lung tissue from aborted fetus in 1960. This is true. You can fact check it. Look it up.
That's where they originated.
But they're still using it today, though. They claim there's no tissue left because they've done it for so long. Unless I'm wrong, I mean that's what I'd always had read about.
Okay. So you're saying let's backtrack because people might misinterpret what you said as I
maybe I'm not saying it right. Maybe
I think I understand what you're saying now. You're saying that when they were incubating the polio vaccine to make the attenuation, they extracted it. They had to pick some source to get it from.
Correct. Yes.
And this is just where they decided to source it from in the first place. Correct. They're not going around killing fetuses. They're not going around aborting fetuses just to get the vaccine instead of using eggs. Okay, because when you said that, it sounded nuts. It sounded like they're just they're aborting fetuses all over the place to make vaccines.
But I mean, what about injecting that? What about injecting foreign animal material like cultured from monkeys? Like the 1960s polio vaccination was also done in Africa, cultured from eggs and so forth and so on.
Okay, so they're using the tissue from the source because it contains the pathogen, and
would any foreign material be left in the vaccination? Because they recalled my son's one of the vaccinations that he had done because the germination of the cells that they were using was contaminated with monkey cancer. It was the rotavirus vaccination, which I regret having because rotavirus is useless the vaccination is perfectly useless in first world country. But so is that a risk?
I mean, I don't really know. I don't have any data on it. Okay. But if I were to guess, I would say it's not, because usually when they are so that they have the inoculation that they design, and then they incubate them, and they still use chicken eggs.
That's correct. Not for every virus. I mean, not for every vaccination, but some they do.
Right. So I guess we're conflating different issues, because what happens is that when we get a live virus from a host, the virus, it blasts through. It blasts through the DNA. That's how it replicates. It blasts the DNA and comes out. So you're saying, what if it picks up an intron from another organism and causes problems like, I guess the contaminated with cancer thing, like you were saying.
I mean, that's why they recalled it, though.
Yeah, it sounds weird, but I guess it's possible. But that's what happened. It's from a jump transfer, but it's not. It wouldn't be like there's still pieces of monkey that'll be floating around in your vaccine.
That's not what I'm saying.
I know that's not what you're saying, but people are listening to this. People are listening to this, and that's how they're going to interpret it.
That's not what I mean. Jason understands what I'm trying to say.
Well, I do now, but when you first say it, it just sounds bizarre because of the way you say it.
But the body reacts to it. Like the body will react to the vaccinations being cultured in eggs. If someone's allergic to egg and send them an anaphylactic shock.
Okay. That it could possibly be that, but they're gonna get if it has any, and if it survived the process of creating the vaccines, very, very, very little. It's not like they just ate an egg.
Oh no,
like
but I mean it's
particles.
But it has been known to happen though.
Yeah, it's rare. I mean, I guess we could say it's a risk. We could put it down as like a minute risk.
Okay.
But I don't know. I don't think it says. If we're going to be critical,
some anti-vaxxers bring that up, and that's why I wanted to bring it up.
Well, yeah, but you have to understand that some of the extremists, they start with a grain of truth, and then they warp it into something that's no longer true. And I think they try to confuse people, and they're not clear about what they actually mean. So anyway, yeah, from a toxic perspective, like are vaccines toxic? Minimally, I think, is my opinion. I think that there are not too many vaccines out there that I wouldn't give just because of those toxic components.
But is it different in injecting in a newborn baby compared to injecting it in you and I? Those amounts of neomycin, those amounts of thermosil, those amounts of, formaldehyde or aluminum, is it different?
I would say that, yeah, it is different. I mean, because, we're looking at a different ratio of mass, so it is a little bit different. But even considering that, let's say it's going to be 8 times more potent for an infant than it would be an adult. I still, like looking at my list of vaccines that I give my child, there's nothing on there where I would have added a vaccine or taken a vaccine away. This is just my personal choice. Other people might feel differently, but there's nothing on here that I would say like, well, I'm not going to do this one because I'm worried about aluminum, or
not going to do this one because you're worried about MSG, why I do always wonder why MSG is in vaccines.
Which vaccine? Oh yeah, there could be some naturally occurring.
That's correct.
You're right, but it's not. Again,
it's not MSG. It's naturally occurring glutamate, but it's still
right.
People label it as the same thing.
Yeah, it's just an amino acid structure. It's not like, it's I don't think it's something to be that worried about, I guess. But as a parent, make your own choices, but definitely research how much is in there and the risk of, it's like, okay, well, there's aluminum vaccines. When has that caused a problem, and can we document it? Can we observe it? Can we measure it? And can we duplicate the result? That's 3 things you got to ask.
My only concern is there a possibility that they could use safer adjuncts and still get the same result? Yeah,
they could, but they're not going to. So
I know.
You start your own prescription drug company, and if you do, I'll stop being friends with you. So.
I will say, for parents, the best thing they can do is get the pamphlets when the vaccination comes. When they do get the vaccination, you have to ask your doctor, and your doctor might go why you need it or roll your eyes. But if you have a good doctor, maybe they'll go get the pamphlet and you can actually see what's in a vaccination, and compare it to the risk, whether or not all that data, a lot of data is in the brochures. Now, granted, they are printed by pharmaceutical companies, and there are some other data that you can find, from more recent studies and so forth and so on, but it's still always good to know. Actually, you should always read those pamphlets, even if it's a medication you're taking, because you will find out a lot of information through mechanisms and actions and so forth and so on about the medicines you're taking through those drug pamphlets.
Yeah, and depending on your technical knowledge, even go and look at the patent too, because you can always get a lot of information from that. And they're all available on Google. I think Google Patents, that's a site, right?
Yes, it is. I use it all the time.
Yeah. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the show today. And I just wanted to kind of address both sides of the issue. The anti-vaccination people, some of them are a little crazy, I think. The medical community, I think that they have, I think they're misrepresenting some things or potentially hiding some things because they're trying to preserve the greater good. And they're saying, well, if we have a few
people, greater wallets, depending on who you ask.
Well, okay, it could be, but I think that they say like, well, we have a responsibility to the populace to try to vaccinate as many people as we can.
Also, their wallets.
All right, I think that I'm trying to make like a deep point here. I'm trying to get deep, and
I know. I'm sorry, but
I'm trying to connect. I'm trying to connect.
Your average doctor and your average nurse, not them. They're just doing as they're told. The board of directors in a pharmaceutical company might have some data wrong to make it look like it.
Yeah, I don't think doctors get paid anymore to vaccinate versus not. I mean,
but they do get perks from drug companies.
That's true.
Drug
they do get perks from drug companies. There's no doubt about that. And the drug companies do help design the curriculum of medical school. There's no doubt about that either. But look, they have an obligation to the greater good. And so they say, well, statistically speaking, yes, these vaccines are going to harm people. It's documented. You can look it up on the CDC webpage of the people that get sick from vaccines or even die from vaccines every year, but that number is smaller than the amount that they're going to help through controlling these diseases and potentially eradicating these diseases.
I mean, we'll do a stream, another stream on vaccinations again once a day. We didn't even get to the Gardasil controversy. And then when I was sitting there in the doctor's office, there was a sign for Gardasil that said, if you could prevent your child from getting cancer, you would take Gardasil or get them to have a Gardasil vaccination. I was like, that's the biggest load of bull propaganda I've ever read in my life.
So the Gardasil vaccination is for the human papillomavirus, and there have been links to the HPV virus and sorry, I'm drawing a blank.
Cancer.
Yeah.
Wink links. Wink links.
Not just any cancer, but
cervical cancer.
Cervical cancer. Sorry, I don't know why I'm drawing a blank right now.
Weak links.
But yeah, so cervical cancer, and that's only going to be implemented and that's only going to be true for women, not for men. And but in Texas, for instance, that's one of our mandatory vaccines is HPV. By the time it's only for girls. When a girl turns, I think 13, they're required to have the HPV shot. That might not be the exact age, but look it up. It's a mandatory government institutionalized vaccine. You're going to get it if you're in Texas and
but
you're
the
female.
thing is, Jason, is most people are walking around with different strains of HPVs. A lot of the ones that they vaccinated against, and a lot of people pass immunity on to their children because a lot of people are walking around with it.
Yeah, in Texas, I think like 1 in 4 people have HPV, and that's bad. They have the sexually transmitted form of it.
And I don't know how many types. I think there's more than 20 different types of HPV. And we're all walking around with different types of HPV, whether we know it or not, or at least immunity to different types of HPV, should I say. You ever had any cold sores? HPV. You ever had warts? HPV.
Well, the cold sore is.
Not cold sore. When I say cold sore, I meant warts. Sorry about that. Apologize.
Yeah, that's a different thing, and that's it's a systemic infection that shows up locally, right?
Correct. I don't know why I said cold sore. I'm tired. It's been a long it's been a long week. Oh yeah, I guess I should say that my grandpa leg got infected. So yeah, that's been fun to deal with.
That's not good. Well, I hope he gets better.
He is. Hey, colloidal silver for the win, as much as you hate it. So
what? You should see, there's this episode of like Dr. Oz or something that's on YouTube that somebody showed me, where this guy like turned purple or something from topically applying.
It's called Aguirre, and I don't know how he got it from topically applying it, but however if he did get it from topically applying it, he did it very wrong.
Yeah, the dude looks like Papa Smurf. It's
are you sure that wasn't? Yeah, that's the guy with the white beard and the glasses. I didn't think he did it topically. I thought he made his own colloidal silver wrong and ingested it for 30 years to get Aguirre, if I remember correctly.
I think, yeah, he was giving it to his pets or something, and then like
he made it wrong.
I wanted to show my pets it was safe, and so like
he made it wrong. Okay,
yeah,
it wasn't even colloidal, and then he ingested it for like
I'm not saying colloidal silver doesn't work. I'm just saying that it's not the cure-all, everybody.
Oh, I know it's not, because it doesn't work systemically very well.
Or at all.
Yeah, unless given through IV, and I'm not really recommending.
I wouldn't give it IV.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's our show, folks.
Good night, everybody. That's all.
I hope you enjoyed it. Goodbye.
Have a great night.